What if your diagnosis isn't the end of your health story, but rather the beginning of a different way of healing? So many people are living in fear, stuck in symptoms, and believing that this is just how their body is now. But what if there's more for you? In this episode, Dr. Amy and I talk about autoimmune health, chronic illness, the role of stress and nervous system, and how small intentional shifts paired with the right mindset can completely change the direction of your health journey. So if you're tired of being told just to manage your symptoms and you're ready to believe that your body is capable of more, this episode is for you. Welcome to Faith Over Pharma, the podcast for women who want a different way to heal. I'm Susan Gladstein, holistic health practitioner and functional nutrition specialist, and here we explore faith-led, holistic approaches to hormones, energy, and symptoms that just keep getting brushed off. If that's you, you're in the right place. If you've been told that your labs are quote-unquote normal, but you still feel exhausted, inflamed, anxious, foggy, hormonally off, or like your body is aging faster than it should, I'm telling you, something is being missed. And deep down, I think you know that too. You've tried the supplements, you've cleaned up your diet, you've followed all of the wellness advice, you've even prayed for answers. But what you don't need is another random protocol for someone who doesn't really know your story. You need someone who can sit down with everything that you've been carrying and help you make sense of it. The labs, symptoms, health history, stress, sleep, cycle, all of it, your energy. The things that you've been told are quote unquote fine, even though you know they don't feel fine to you. This is the work I do inside of the Rooted Reset. I take time to look at the whole picture with you, not just one lab or one symptom or one quick fix. And together, we start answering the questions you've probably been asking for a long time. Why do I feel this way? What is my body trying to tell me? What actually matters right now? Where do I start? You don't need more noise. You need clarity. You need a plan that fits your real life, your body, and the season you're actually in. That's what the Rooted Reset is here to do. If you're ready to stop guessing and finally understand what's being missed, go to susangladstein.com. So you've been given medications, maybe some general lifestyle advice, and yet you still don't feel like yourself. I know I've been there. And maybe you're even thinking like I did, that there's a part of you that is like, is this really as good as it gets? Today's conversation is kind of going to challenge that. And I'm very excited to have Amy here with us to talk about what it actually looks like to create better health after diagnosis, not just managing symptoms, but to really rebuild in a way that supports how your body was designed to function. And she's a pharmacist, so you guys know that I love having pharmacists on the show. And she's also a board certified health and wellness coach who specializes in autoimmune health and behavior change. And I'd really just love to kind of start there with your journey. You've walked through your own diagnosis, and I'm curious what that experience opened your eyes to that maybe that you didn't really see before. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. And yeah, perfect place to start. I first heard the word autoimmune when I was 17 and got diagnosed with a skin condition called vitiligo and kept rolling on in my teens. I was in pharmacy school in my early 20s. And I started to learn that these autoimmune diseases tend to cluster, meaning if you get one, you could get another one. And so my very active mind did what brains do and went to the negative and what else is coming. And my second autoimmune diagnosis came in I was 25, I believe, and it was Graves' disease, which is a thyroid autoimmune disease. And I still knew that something wasn't right. I still had this looming feeling like there was another diagnosis coming. And at 27, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And, all diagnoses deserve their weight, but that one felt like my big diagnoses that really shook me. It was a life quake of epic proportions. And at that point, being a lover of learning, I dove into functional medicine for myself. I thought something is going on in my body that it's not happy. and it's time for me to listen and look. And so when I wanted to go back to school and learn more, I was like, ooh, I could be a functional medicine practitioner. But then they opened a coaching academy, and I thought, oh no, that's what I want to do. I want to actually help people do the things they know they want to do. I mean, habits and lifestyle are so obvious to all of us that, wow, our bodies would probably feel and function better if we could do these. But I was just fascinated why it's so hard for people. And so that's kind of how I ended up with my pharmacist hat and my coaching hat. And the pharmacist hat's so neat because it kind of made me a scientist to really dig into this in a way that there's research that can help us on how we change and how we feed our bodies these delicious thoughts and feelings and habits and things. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Well, and I'm curious because you can tell us a little bit more, but I definitely, the more I do these episodes and the more I even dive into my own personal experience and the healing that I've had, I mean, so much of everything is our mindset. But even talking about those behavioral things, like we know what we need to do, and yet why is it so hard? I know for me, when I became a health coach, it was very I don't know, it was almost like it shined the spotlight of these expectations. I had this perfectionist attitude of, I need to be perfect with my diet and I've got to eat this certain thing. And then when I didn't, when the emotional eating took over, I was paralyzed, like just very upset that I knew better and yet I couldn't do better. And that just made the cycle worse for
Yeah.
me, like as far as emotional eating goes. But I know that I would love to kind of just pick your brain about what your experience was like, because your three different things are individually very heavy, but like, how do you deal with that mentally?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I was first diagnosed with MS, I really, looking back, had the belief that my life would always be a little bit worse. I was not going to be healthy. I knew a lot about the human body. I knew a lot about what the textbooks say is happening in my nervous system and my immune system. And I knew a lot about these big words that are tied to a diagnosis like that, progressive, potentially disabling and chronic and neurological and, these scary words. But words have so much weight. And let's take health, for example. You opened with the idea that I love to share and help people live, that we can become healthier after. Well, first, we need to look at the word health and healthy, because if you look it up in a textbook, dictionary, it's the absence of symptoms or disease. And so very early for me, I realized, oh, if I want to be healthy, if I want to get to have the feeling and the emotion of healthy, I have to redefine what health means for me. So the term autoimmune health was born very naturally because it signaled to my body that, yes, I have this disease. And I am also going to try my damnedest to still create health. And so all of a sudden it started looking like, well, what are the ways I could be healthy no matter what is happening in my immune system or my nervous system? And these lifestyle changes I was able to make, it was pretty evident pretty quick that my mental health got a whole lot better, my emotional health, my gut health, my metabolic health, and in so many ways. And so for everybody listening, first it's just accepting that, yes, we may never meet that textbook definition, but who made that up anyway? I mean, that's impossible, like you said, this unrealistic expectation and standard, and we get to define it for us, and then we get to figure out how to live it and move towards it in a way that doesn't feel like junk, which is how most people are conditioned to go after health.
And I like that because, and I talk a lot about that on the podcast as well, that sometimes when we are identifying as our diagnosis, that that's part of who we are, it's really hard to heal from that. And it's really hard to let go of the negative things that can be associated with that. If you're surrounding yourself that is, with other people that is like my PCOS or my MS or whatever, and you can feed off of that negativity with one another. So when you say that you help people create a better health after diagnosis than before, what does that look like in real life?
It starts with getting a definition down for you. So I will walk people through, an exercise and prompts, which we can briefly cover today, but it's really like, okay, when you envision yourself with the health that you want, what is happening? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Who are you with? We really bring it back to these very tangible parts of a life where you are living your purpose. We bring it to the tangible parts that are in your control. So I'm not going to put in my definition of autoimmune health that, I no longer have symptoms from multiple sclerosis. That could be a very real possibility. And actually, I could include that, but I choose not to because I want to make sure it's 100% in my control. So, my definition, and I have so many of from my clients that write theirs, and they're so beautiful and they're so unique. But mine is, autoimmune health for me is the feeling of pride, knowing that I'm doing what I can to show up and serve those I love. And you notice every single part of that is in my control. And when I'm doing that, I feel healthy. I have trained myself to identify what healthy feels like with that version of me. And that's what brings me, to each new goal that I want to set and each new thing that I want to do. Because we don't write a definition that doesn't challenge us. We want to grow. We want to have a little bit of that, I call it good stress, good under quotes, but we want to strive for better. We want to make sure that we're doing what we can to feel and function at our best.
And I love that. I was just talking with someone today because I think a lot of times we can get a diagnosis, especially if it's something, pretty severe, like a cancer diagnosis or something like that, to where the prognosis that we're given doesn't have a lot of positive around it. Sorry, there's nothing we can do. You're beyond hope. Basically, you're just ticking out the rest of your life. Now, although not, I'm not saying this like from a heart of lack of empathy, because like I totally get that. I learned at 14 after my dad committed suicide that life is short. You never know. All of our days are numbered, right? And so what we do with the number of days that we do have and making an impact and being positive makes a difference. But do you feel like part of the issue is that maybe there's a lot more focus on symptoms instead of really just understanding what the body is trying to communicate, and how does that change things for people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I see it every day. People stop trusting themselves. They stop trusting what potentially their body's trying to say, or that they know what their bodies may want. And so it's really tuning in and developing self-trust that you are on your support squad. I think that we all need a support squad. And so, yes, a physician trained in Western medicine is likely going to be on that support squad. I know it is for me. Potentially a coach, maybe it's a physical therapist, maybe it's a therapist during some times, but you are the center of that support squad. And so I really don't think that it is physicians or doctors who are not trying, but I think it's just that's not their expertise. They're not trained to spend the time and to talk about these things. And so it's really not expecting something from them that maybe they're not equipped to give. And so instead, back to taking control, where could I get this information? And yeah, I really think that the self-trust piece is huge because when we are deciding what we are going to set as our goals. So we kind of talked about this big picture goal of our vision of what autoimmune health will look like, or if it's not autoimmune disease, our vision of health that we'd like. That's part one of a feel good goal. I call them feel good goals. Part two is what is the next habit that if I make it, it's going to get me closer to that big picture goal. So that's what we're working on in our actual days because it's hard to take that big vision and make it tangible in our days. So That may look like eating less ultra processed foods and more vegetables. That may look like getting exercise in 4 days a week in a stretch session. Those become the habit goals that we go after. And I mean, and though that is what can feel so hard at times, but that is what we really work on and look at to get us to that bigger picture goal.
Man, that's so good. And for me, it was kind of, I had this all or nothing perfectionist mentality. And when there was a lot of things about my health that I wanted to change, and even just how I would react to my kids. And, I was kind of always in this reactive mode, which when you're stressed and running late, everything slows down, right? Your kids move like sloths when you're late to school or whatever. Like, why are you moving so slow? And
Yeah,
that wasn't the proactive approach, but there were so many things that I wanted to change. It really took for me understanding that one shift, that 1 degree, that one step, the one thing, because it could work either way. You could be moving in a positive direction, or
yeah,
you could be moving in a negative. And I think a lot of times we can get stuck in that loop of the
yeah,
negative, and it's hard to break out of that. And that's also why I think, what you do is so important in finding somebody. You mentioned even just like going to the doctor that may not be in their scope of practice. And I see that a lot, especially like for my fertility clients. The people that they're seeing are just not equipped to handle the
yeah.
questions that they deserve answers to. So creating that team is so important. But even talking about those inner and outer habits, which I
Mm,
love that concept, can you kind of break down what that means and why someone who has, autoimmune symptoms or whatever can't just focus on food and
yeah.
workouts alone?
Yeah. So the scientist in me really realized that I need something tangible for myself and for others on how are we actually going to do this day in and day out. And habits are the perfect vehicle. They are making up 40 to 50% of what we're doing all the time on repeat. So if we can shift our habits to more energizing, more healing, more inflammation squashing things, then it's very obvious we will become healthier bodies. The difference between the way I saw habits very clearly that I don't hear other people talking about is that it's not only the habitual things we're doing, how we're eating, moving, sleeping, those are the obvious outer habits. But how we think and how we feel, those are the inner habits that are driving half of our life. So it may not always feel like it, but we are thinking things habitually. Those become beliefs. We are feeling things habitually. And it's comfortable. Our bodies keep going back to it. And until we shine a light on our thoughts and our feelings as habits that we can change, then it will likely feel like you are stuck. And so when I got this diagnosis, it felt like this life quake happening. I was eating quote unquote perfect. I was exercising exactly how I should. I was doing all the outer habits, but I still wasn't feeling healthy. I still wasn't enjoying life. Even I couldn't even enjoy the good things that were happening. I was still relatively, I was functioning. I was doing well, but I was so stuck in the future, in that fear, that habitual fear of what was coming, and that habitual like belief of reinforcing this is terrible. Oh my God, this disease is going to drive my life. And so it really took applying the same strategies to change habits, applying that to how I was thinking and feeling. And slowly but surely, I learned that I can change how I think and feel when I approach it with the plethora of science there is behind neuroplasticity and all that goodness. So I really had to create it for myself, honestly, and that's been the biggest change in my life and in my health is really taking some ownership and control over what I choose to think and feel in the midst of something that I like to say I wouldn't order off a menu.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad that you brought up fear because I think that it is such a powerful thing for people. It drives a lot of our actions, our reactions, and usually not always in the most positive. way that we would want, right? I even think about like all the fear that was surrounding COVID, and I like to say that most of that is of the devil, not of the Lord. It's not scripture to be afraid of things, but
Yeah.
because I see this so often, how big of a role does stress or fear and the nervous system play on even autoimmune conditions? And why do you think that that piece of it gets overlooked?
Huge. I mean, stress is not only known to be a trigger or a cause of an autoimmune disease and of symptoms, but it's often an effect. So we have this diagnosis or these very real symptoms that can feel stressful. And so it can be this vicious cycle. But the good thing about cycles like that is just as it can pull us down, finding the right, for me, it was the right thought, message, idea that, whoa, I can take some ownership of these thoughts and feelings. That was the right message at the moment that that spiral effect actually can flow upwards too. So it really is something that can change quickly once we learn a new skill set, a new mindset, a new way of doing things. And there another beautiful spiritual tie-in is a belief that a true miracle is a shift in perception, right? I mean, some mornings when I am saying my prayers, it's not for something to change that feels tough, but at any moment, I can be granted a miracle to look at something in a different way. And so, on a grand scale, looking at my life and my health through the lens of the health I have and the health I can still create versus the disease that is technically in my body, that is one of the greatest miracles that I feel I've asked for and have been granted. And so that doesn't mean that you see that shift once and then it's forever. You got to keep coming back to it because it's a habit. So, in the same way, it's doing those conscious repetitions, one thought at a time. When our brain wants us to go to the fear and we say, oh, hey, fear, I'm going to the other direction to the love. When it wants to go to the disease, and you redirect it kindly to the health parts. And again, we got to keep showing up for the work. It's not easy. It's very simple. These patterns in our brain have just their well-worn grooves. And so it can just be putting yourself in rooms with different thinking like this and different, like I said, mindsets and skill sets, because there is the spiritual and the mental plane, but then we got to pair it with the physical plane, and we got to do what we can to get ourselves in those situations where it really can impact, what is happening in our everyday lives.
And it's so, so good and such a good visual. I think for most of us, it's not about having more knowledge or information. It's really about that implementation as being the missing piece. So, for you, what does sustainable healing actually look like?
You mentioned, not needing more information. I would say that overwhelm is the number one emotion that drives people to finally say, okay, Amy, I want to try a different way. Like they are so sick of being overwhelmed. And simplicity really is the antidote to that. I mean, so much of sustainable change is going back to the basics. And the basic things that what feels good. I call them feel good habits, and you create feel good habit protocols because back to that self-trust piece, there's no expert that knows. We can tap into the science on what is, big things that we know can help us do well, certain ways of eating and moving and things. But at the end of the day, what feels good for you may not feel good for me. And so that sustainability comes with simplifying it, going back to the basics, making it doable, and leaning into what feels good for you and trusting that if it feels good, it's likely good for you. And so some people, you may be listening and be like, well, it feels good to binge on ice cream and do all that. Ask yourself, when you're done, does that feel good? Like No, a treat is only a treat if you look back on it and you're still glad that you did it. That's how I like to define a treat. Um, so yeah, it's really using I have something called the ABC Habit Playbook, and it's 20 strategies, or I call them plays, and it's all the research, but made in a tangible, usable way that we can find those things that feel good and are good for us.
Yeah, that was one thing, when I was going through my health and life coach certifications, like really just understanding that yes, habit change in of itself is an uncomfortable thing because you're having to create these new grooves. But whenever I really sat back and thought, yes, I love ice cream, it did not love me back. And so to pay for that for 3 days afterwards really wasn't the feeling that I was after. It was in that moment. And then what is it that I was actually searching for,
Yeah.
whatever that was, and labeling that emotional. But if somebody is listening right now and they're feeling discouraged, maybe they've tried everything and nothing has worked, what would you want them to hear today?
There is a play from the playbook, and it is also just something we live by. I am coming up on my 200th episode of my podcast, and it's called Autoimmune Health Secrets. And so I asked my audience, what is the autoimmune health secret that has changed your health, changed your life? And I got on and recorded with 6 wonderful listeners. And at some point during all of them, they brought up this play, this strategy, which is trust in the tiny. And trust in the tiny is a little bit different than tiny habits or the 2-minute rule that you may have heard, because it pulls in the mindset piece, maybe the faith piece, that not only is the tiny thing maybe more doable, but we have to trust that doing the tiny thing is actually what gets us towards the bigger things, to able to move mountains. So if anybody's overwhelmed, if anyone's discouraged, trust in the tiny, and that could look different at different times. So it could be tiny, meaning choose one thing to start with. I created a quiz to help, because there's so many things we can do. Back to that overwhelm. We could do food, movement, mindset, sleep. Like, where do I start? There's 6 key areas. The quiz is designed to help you trust in the tiny. It will ask you some of these desires that you have to help decide where is your best place to start. Trusting in that tiny, getting that answer, asking yourself, what would feel good about food if I changed it? And then committing to that until you figure out how to make it happen. Too often we get thrown off track and we're like, oh my God, that didn't work. That's the words you mentioned. If they tried different things and it didn't work, did we work it? We are very trained as a society to set goals but not take them too seriously. That didn't work. But what if you committed that I am going to figure this out? I am going to learn this skill of changing the habits. And now I know the first place to start. So to summarize that trusting in the tiny, starting somewhere, and really loving yourself through the way, through the process, instead of beating yourself up.
So good. I relate to that a lot because when I had a lot of things about my life that I wanted to change and understanding the tiny, for me, it was I didn't have any sort of space to collect my thoughts and be proactive first thing in the morning before my kids got up because we were basically getting up at the same time. And so for me, it was just getting up early to have that quiet time to think so that I wasn't in this rushed stage. And so different seasons of my life have looked different. And I love that so much. And you mentioned your podcast, which I'll make sure is in the show notes, but let us know how we can get a hold of you. And if somebody was wanting to work with you, how can they do that?
Absolutely, yeah. So the quiz, if you're curious what your number one area would be, that will land you where I can deliver a little prize in your inbox, and you can hit reply at any point and get in touch. But um, there also on my website, there is a chance to explore what it would look like to join my coaching membership, which is called Club Habit Hub, or the club for short. And yeah, this is what we do. We figure out how to become really, really good at changing habits, how to decide what habits to make, how to decide what habits maybe to break, and then the most important part is the follow through. How do we actually do it? And so It really is a skill that serves you in so many areas, showing up and figuring out some of those things like you mentioned. What am I thinking and feeling that are contributing to what I'm doing or not doing is a great way to say it. And so yeah, you can do it. I mean, I don't even know you, listener, but you can because, you're human and you'll have the same roadblocks that we all have, but it's kind of like having the answers to the test. We know the questions, we know what's going to throw us off, and it's just finding the answers to get around whatever we call them habit hurdles, whatever those things that try to get in the way. None of it scares me. None of it will scare you eventually. You'll just start to see these patterns and just start to build confidence in that self-trust that you can do this and shift from the disease towards the health, and yeah, and live a really good life.
Amen to that. I love that. And it is so true that when you kind of take a step back, and especially having community who gets it when you're first starting out, and it's very uncomfortable to change those patterns, and your body's going to try to keep you safe, and so it's going to push back. And then what do you do when that happens? If you're all alone in an island and you've created this isolation for yourself and you don't have somebody to reach out to, or you're relying on that 15-minute doctor's appointment,
Yeah.
they're not probably going to be able to tell you what to do next.
Yeah.
So having a community of people who are understanding is so, so valuable. I love that. And before we jump off, I'm so grateful for you and all the amazing nuggets that you've shared. But is there anything else that you would want to add that we didn't talk about?
Well, you made a great point just a second ago. You talked about how it can sometimes we can get this identity of a lot of people because you're in maybe a free Facebook group or a support group. And it's so funny because I do something called group coaching, and you're aware there is a power to this community you can build when it's well curated and run. And the word group, I worry, gets tainted because people have been in one of those free groups where they're dumping, symptoms or giving really terrible unsolicited advice that could even be dangerous. And so, yeah, rethinking what would community look like if it's done in a way that is supportive and really tapping into the benefit of that, because it really can go such a long way with that. And yeah, the only other thing I would say is because we're talking about this lifestyle and conventional medicine, really seeing that they can be synergistic, right? Seeing that it doesn't have to be something that is pitted against each other, but instead, like improving our lifestyle is going to help no matter what we decide to do. So I do choose to take a disease modifying therapy for my MS, but that's my defense. My offense is going to be what am I doing and what are these habits? And so really ask for yourself, and make a hopefully a well-informed decision.
Yeah, and that was my whole thing with this podcast, because I think that so often we're only given either the mainstream, or like we think it has to be either or. And my whole like goal here is to realize it doesn't have to be a either or. It can be that and I've talked about this before, like I've had 4 C-sections, and I wouldn't have, my 4 kids if it wasn't for that method of delivery. And
Yes,
as a
yes, you're
holistic
right.
person, you kind of like, I'm having all these drugs and all these things. And so I really had to kind of come to terms with that. And I think we all go through that. So being surrounded by people who are in agreement with that, who are helping you and encouraging you and giving you good sound advice so you can listen to your gut and follow what your gut is telling you, is so valuable. And I appreciate that you brought that up. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being here, for sharing. And again, I'll make sure all of that's in the show notes so they can reach out to you. But this was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thanks for everything you do.
Thanks for listening to Faith Over Pharma. If this helped cut through the noise, share it with a friend who always asks, do you think this actually works? And if you're ready to go deeper through immersive retreats, phototherapy, or the Rooted Reset, you'll find your next steps at susangladstein.com.
Thanks for listening.